We've got 2 hours tonight together. It is a webinar style, but there are spaces for you to ask any questions that you do have. So please ask away. This is a session where we can all share experiences. So this is our Helping Our Children Stay Safe session for parents and carers. If you have the opportunity, you can scan that QR code and it will take you through to a pre-session survey. It is anonymous. It's probably a 7-question tick boxy thing, and then we'll revisit it at the end of the session. So just take a moment to scan that QR code. It is a 2-hour webinar, but it is very relaxed. It's very informal. We will try and have just even a 5-minute break halfway through, probably for my benefit as well, just to get my voice back. I've been speaking solidly across Humberside for the last 2 days, so my voice is getting a bit crackly. I do apologise. Okay, so just a bit of a health warning before we start, just to take a bit of a moment to recognise that the topics that we're going to be talking about can be triggering, they can be upsetting, they can affect us in many different ways, personally, directly, non-directly, professionally. So please do consider who you can reach out to if you are affected by any of the information that you share. If it's uncomfortable, if you want to take some time out, please do that. Like we said at the start, we're going to record the session, so you can watch this session back in the future if you need to. We will also send out the slides for you to read through if you want to, and all of the links and resources that I'm going to mention throughout the session, and much, much more as well. So this session, we're going to look at the drivers of violence and knife crime. Looking at knife crime from young people's perspectives, we'll look at the signs and stages of child exploitation, gangs, gang life, considering online harms, social media, gang-related music, and other influences. And we'll be looking at how we can empower our children, young people, to stay safe with our Safe Teas approach. And like I said, further support and resources will be supplied. So some of you may or may not have heard of the Ben Kinsella Trust before. We are a knife crime prevention charity. But who was Ben Kinsella? So Ben, as described by his family, was an ordinary 16-year-old boy, and they don't describe that in a detrimental way towards their son, their brother. He was just very regular. He loved football, he loved music, he loved design and art. He wanted to be a tattoo artist, but his parents were like, absolutely not. So he decided, okay, I'll be a graphic designer instead. His artwork that he created for his GCSEs is quite phenomenal. So we have it up in our exhibition spaces where we run our workshops in London. His written word was also quite phenomenal. As part of his GCSE coursework, he was asked to write a piece of text, a persuasive piece of text about a societal issue. So this was 2008. And Ben grew up in London, in the capital. And he chose to write about knife crime. He wrote to the Prime Minister at the time, Gordon Brown, pleading for change, begging that something had to be done. The streets weren't safe, it was lawless. To complement that piece of writing, he also wrote a creative piece of text in which he described what it might feel like to be murdered. So it was really at the forefront of this young boy's mind that his safety was being compromised. Ben was one of 4 siblings. He had 3 sisters, so you can imagine he was completely doted on. And he was really popular. He had lots of friends. He was a very funny boy. But what happened to Ben? So Ben was out celebrating finishing his GCSEs on the 28th of June 2008. So this is nearly 18 years ago. He and his friends went to a local music venue, and while they were there were 2 other groups of teenagers who were a bit older than Ben and his friends. They had an altercation and they were ejected from the venue. Later that night, Ben and his friends were walking home when they realised they were being followed by the older group of teenagers who had been kicked out of this venue. Ben and his friends started to run. For whatever reason, Ben stopped running. Perhaps he thought, why would I run? I don't know these people. I didn't have anything to do with that altercation in the pub. So he stopped running. However, these three older teenagers were out for revenge and they caught up with Ben and stabbed him 11 times in 5 seconds. Ben was able to stumble around the corner to where his friends were waiting. Sadly, this is where he collapsed and he was taken to hospital where he lost his life on the 29th of June 2008. His sister at the time, Brooke Kinsella, was a fairly well-known EastEnders actress. You may remember her. And at that time as well, there had been an unprecedented amount of young people dying through violence that year. Ben was the 17th teenager to die, and it was only June. And I remember it really well. I grew up in the same area as Ben, but I remember it so vividly as I was on maternity leave with my eldest child, coincidentally also called Ben. And I was there cradling my 3, 4 month old baby, watching this unfold on the news, watching the people's march as people took to the streets saying enough's enough, thinking, what have I brought a child into? This is frightening. But like I said, my child's 18 now. This is a long time ago, but these are the conversations we're still needing to have. If anything, it feels like it's getting worse. It feels like the streets are less safe, the schools are less safe, is the perception that we might think as parents. So Brooke sets up the trust in her brother's name. What do? We campaign for action and justice for those affected by knife crime, but we also educate. So we educate young people in our workshops to make positive choices on how to stay safe. And then I deliver the training for any adult that supports a young person, whether it's parents or carers, teachers, police, youth practitioners, youth workers, etc. A tiny little background from myself, just so you understand why I'm talking about this tonight. Other than being a parent, so I've got an 18-year-old. I can't believe I'm even saying that now. An 18-year-old and a 9-year-old as well. I've worked with the trust for about 4 years now. Before that, I worked for a mental health charity, so you'll hear lots of what I talk about is embedded in wellbeing as well. Before that, I was a police officer. I was a police officer for 20 years, and my last posting was within a gangs unit as an engagement officer. So supporting families who had been affected by every parent and carer's worst nightmare. Violence, exploitation, intimidation, kidnap, torture, all of those things that might happen alongside gang life and criminal gangs, people who are exploiting children to further their own illegal businesses. Now, like I said, Ben was murdered 18 years ago. It does feel like we are still hearing so many stories about young people losing their lives or young people being harmed. I know there was a news story that broke just this afternoon where a young girl, I think it was in Norfolk, so in East Anglia, a young girl was stabbed to some degree in her school. And it feels like sometimes it's every day that we're reading these news stories. These are some of the local stories from around Humberside. I include things like county lines and drugs gangs because it's important to consider that whilst knife crime doesn't solely affect those who are involved with gangs, it's a tragic byproduct of those who have been exploited into gangs or who are living in that gang lifestyle. We'll look at gangs a bit later on. It can be worrying for us as parents to see this and think about how safe our children are. I've got safety plans in place for my eldest when he goes out. We've got code words that he uses, special emojis that he shares. If I know something's happened, I go get him, I check his location, and we have conversations about basic safety advice, trusting your gut feeling, knowing when to step away from a situation or a group of friends or a situation. But violence isn't the only thing that young people are concerned about or that causes them issues or challenges. Of course, there are many different pressures for young people, and I've listed some of them on the screen there. I won't go through all of these, I'll just pick out a couple. And there may be things that I might have missed off on there. And we might cover some of those things as we go through the session. But if there's anything that is burning away that you want to pop in the Q&A, just pop it in there and we'll endeavour to answer it at the end of the session. So the two things that I want to talk about here are friendships and belonging. And it can feel quite tiring as a parent when your parents are so oriented with their friends. Everything is about their friends and spending time with their friends. It feels like we've lost them or we've lost part of them to their friends. And this is a really natural part of developing as a teenager into adulthood. It doesn't mean we've lost them. It means that they are finding their feet, where they fit, the hierarchy of their peer group, the landscape that they are moving through. But some children will become very peer attached. So everything their friends do, they need to be there. It's almost like a fear of missing out. And they are quite desperate to keep that attachment strong. So sometimes we might see behaviours that we know are harmful or we know are not in their best interests, but maybe they're a desperate attempt by children to secure that attachment with their friends, their peer group. Something else I want to talk about is identity and recognizing that we've all got multiple identities that make up who we are, whether it's our sexuality, our gender, religion, race, cognitive ability, neurodivergence, whether it's our physical ability, our location, our financial status. All of these identities make us unique, but they also give us very unique experiences of the world around us as well. We could all live in the same street, couldn't we? But as soon as we leave the house, we're going to have really different experiences of life, accessing things like healthcare, education, job opportunities, our feelings of safety. So it's just something to bear in mind as we move on through the session to consider our own identities as a parent, how that shapes us as parents, but also our children's identities, and how sometimes our own identities can feel like they bring conflict. Understanding our own backgrounds, our heritage, the morals that have been instilled within us by our families, and also desperately wanting to fit in with our friends when we go to school can be quite conflicting. It can be a difficult time for some young people. But we do know that young people are worried about their safety, and in fact, they are worried about knife crime. You've only got to look at recent research around young people and safety, that despite where young people live, many young people don't feel safe, and they say that knife crime is sort of the top concern when it comes to their safety, whether or not they have been directly affected by knife crime in their community before. But actually, what is knife crime? Knife crime is a term that we hear bandied around all the time. And it's one of these phrases that can bring about this moral panic. If we hear it so much, we can think that, my goodness, it is everywhere. It's affecting everyone. And we'll look at the reality of that in a moment. But what actually does knife crime mean? So there's not one single piece of legislation that governs knife crime. Knife crime in itself refers to any criminal offence that involves a knife or other bladed or pointed article. So it broadly includes two categories: possession offences, so carrying knives, so carrying a knife in a public place without lawful excuse. And that doesn't have to be a specific type of knife. That can be a kitchen knife, that can be a sharpened object, a made offensive weapon. And then you've got knife-enabled offences. So offences like robbery or sexual assault, where a knife has been used as an aggravating factor. There are some weapons, however, that are illegal to possess entirely, whether you're out in the public space or at school or at home. You are not allowed to possess things like machetes, ninja swords, zombie knives, flick knives, etc. Now, what you will be sent out is a guide to knife crime for parents and carers. I've got a hard copy here, but you'll actually be sent out a digital copy that's been created in partnership with Humber VPP. So it's got some local resources in there as well. So if you want to find out a little bit more about knife crime, what it means, how to find out what knives or what weapons are prohibited, then it will all be in there. So let's look at some knife crime statistics. So nationally, knife crimes increased by over 80% in the last decade, which is, again, a frightening number, a frightening statistic. And it might make us think, well, this is all because more and more young people are picking up knives, more and more young people are getting involved in serious violence. But actually, in the majority of cases, knife crime isn't gang related, and knife crime involves adults in domestic violence situations. But we don't necessarily see those headlines in the press. And consider why we don't see those headlines. Perhaps it's because they're not as salacious. They're not going to get the rewatches, the angry emojis, the comments, the shares. In old money, it's not going to sell papers. Modern news outlets make their money by having users interact with the material online. So they need the stories to be as glamorous, as salacious, as frightening as possible to get people interacting. Now, despite it not being solely a young person's issue, teenagers are over twice as likely to be murdered with a knife than they were a decade ago. And 82% of homicides among teenage victims involve a knife or sharp instrument. In the majority of those homicides, so murder and manslaughter, over 40% of those cases, it's a kitchen knife that is used. So something that all of us can access, any of us can get hold of, and often that's the sort of thing that might be grabbed in haste, maybe as a reaction to something or in anger. While we're talking about kitchen knives, it's a great place to talk about an initiative called Let's Be Blunt. So you may remember in 2024 the tragedy that took place in Southport in the summer, where 3 young girls were murdered whilst they were at a dance class. The teacher who survived that attack, Leanne Lucas, set up a campaign called Let's Be Blunt. And this campaign is there to promote the swapping over of knives with pointed ends to blunted end knives. Okay, why? What difference does it make? So blunted end knives have been rigorously tested at De Montfort University, and they found that they cannot penetrate cloth, let alone flesh, if used in a jabbing or a stabbing motion. Now, you're more likely to be seriously injured if you are attacked with a knife that's used in that stabbing motion rather than slicing motion. Sorry, it's quite graphic descriptions here. So it's worth having a look at swapping out the knives you've got in your homes or your schools, wherever you come here from, to these blunt-ended knives. And you can find the links to those on the Let's Be Blunt website. I'd like to practice what I preach, so I made the swap myself at home. They're fairly cheap. They're about £10 for 4 knives. We don't need the point on our knives, other than opening packs of ham or bacon. You know, we don't use that pointed tip unless you're a butcher. So have a think about perhaps making that swap. So locally, we'll look at some statistics as well. And then I'm not going to talk about statistics after this because statistics only tell us one thing. And they tell us that knife crime is being recorded in an area. So every year or two, police forces around the country submit their knife crime figures to the Office for National Statistics. And on the left of that graphic there, you can see the top 10 police force areas for rates of knife crime. So no surprise, you've got the Met Police in at number 1 with the highest rate of knife crime per population. No surprise, it's the capital. Its levels of crime is high across all crime types. population is higher. And then, as you can see, as you move down, you can see other parts of the UK. Some might surprise you, some may not. Humberside is at number 8 there. Now, when we look at statistics like this, I don't want us to get bogged down and think, wow, we've got a problem with knife crime around Humberside, because actually what that can signify is you might have a police force who are detecting that people are carrying knives. So there might be another force area who appears to have relatively low levels of knife crime, but actually maybe that's because it's not being detected, it's not being found or enforced. So please do take those statistics with a pinch of salt, because they can mean only so much. The numbers that matter are the numbers that of young children who are dying, young people who are dying because of knife crime. In the last decade, 806 young people have died because a knife or sharp object was used to kill them. So young people under the age of 24 across England and Wales, that's 806 lives lost, 806 families ripped apart, 806 communities perhaps living in fear, living with that trauma within the community as well. Those are the numbers that matter. It's beyond numbers. These are real children, real people with real lives. But it's important to understand why young people might be committing acts of serious violence. So when I say serious violence, I'm talking about things like stabbings or serious sexual violence. So in 2024, an organisation called the Youth Endowment Fund did some research with over 10,000 young people across England and Wales who had been affected by violence, either as a victim, perpetrator, or both. And they asked them, why do young people commit acts of serious violence? And the three most common answers given were this. I'll bring them up at once. So the first reason given was because of a personal characteristic of the victim. So because of the victim's identity, the victim's race, their religion, their sexuality, or their gender. So here we're looking at things like hate crime or sexual violence. Now, for that to take place, you need a young person to firstly have very harmful stereotyped views about someone's identity, and then also the ability or the willingness to commit violence because of those views. So that's, of course, not every young person. The second most common reason given is because of gang, neighbourhood, or school rivalry. And again, this is a bit of a postcode lottery, because not every person grows up in an area that has historic gang violence or historic neighbourhood violence or issues with going from one side of town to the next. I know from spending time up in Humberside the last few days, speaking to people from the north of the Humber, so Hull, that traditionally there was an east-west divide, and that perhaps harks back to rugby league rivalry. Rivalry can exist in areas for many reasons. It can be sports related, it can be postcode related, it can be school related. But again, it depends where you're born, doesn't it? Because you might grow up in an area where that doesn't exist. Now, the third most common reason given was provocation, as in a child had been provoked to act violently. Now, why do I think this is so interesting? Because we all have the ability to be provoked into feeling a very strong emotion or having a strong emotional reaction. You know, all it takes is for someone to upset us, hurt us, betray us, lie to us, harm us, for us to have a very strong emotional reaction. Now, as adults, we may be able, not always, but we may be able to slow things down, step away from the situation, because we know we need to calm down before we react, or should we even react. But for so many young people, they're still learning how to regulate their emotions, how to understand their emotions, why they feel a certain way, and also understanding that they can't act physically or violently or aggressively alongside those emotions because of the harmful outcomes. At the end of the session, we're going to look at ways in which we can help children literally put a pause button on a situation when they have been triggered, when there is an event that's been happened, when they've been threatened, or someone says something hurtful, and the automatic reaction is act now aggressively. But we're going to talk about how we can empower our children to slow things down. Okay. Just going to take a swig of water. But why knives? Why are knives the weapons that are being picked up? We might understand the motivations for the violence, but why knives? Because it's not simply because they are easily accessible, cheap, or easy to conceal. There has to be a motivation to pick up that weapon in the first place. So that motivation might be for offensive purposes. So to use to harm someone or to threaten someone, to intimidate someone, or it could be a child having to hold up a knife or carry a knife for someone else that's controlling them. It could be for defensive purposes because that child's been threatened. It could be for flex or clout, status, reputation, however you want to call it, to bravado, in fact, to make someone maybe feel bigger and stronger, bit of a peacocking. It could be, this is what we hear the majority of the time, just in case. So some young people believe that carrying a knife keeps them safer. It does not. You are less safe if you carry a knife. Why is that? You are statistically more likely to be harmed with your own knife than anyone else's. So it could be grabbed off you, you could be carrying it and accidentally hurt yourself as well. It also heightens the situation. If someone's carrying a knife, it escalates that conflict dynamically. It can also give people a sense of false bravery or confidence, so that if there is something happening, if there is a fight or there's something going on, that young person runs towards it. They feel bigger, they feel stronger because they've got their knife. If you remember nothing else from this evening session, please remember this and share this with your young people. You are less safe if you carry a knife. You are more at risk of being harmed at carrying your own knife. Now, other influences could be the influences of peers. So if one member of a group of friends carry a knife, the rest are likely to follow. It becomes normalized. The herd mentality is strong in all of us as adults. But to be quite honest, it's even stronger for young people. Young people don't want to be either caught slipping or seeming like they're behind everyone else. Young people might be worried about the environment. They might have fears of safety. They might think, what is everyone else doing to feel safer? Oh, they're carrying knives, or they believe that people are carrying knives. Well, actually, the vast majority of young people do not carry knives. 99% of young people don't carry knives. But that's not necessarily what we believe by the things that we hear or see on the news or what children are seeing on social media. And contagion as well. So new weapons are introduced. Young people may start to level up, get a bigger knife, get a more intimidating knife, and they might fear that they're not going to be able to keep up otherwise. Now, along with the societal drivers of knife crime, things that perhaps we have no say in as the general public, things like inequity or poverty, those sorts of things, those have links to high levels of violence and knife crime, amongst other things as well. But we know that fear is one of the biggest drivers of knife crime and violence amongst young people. We know that fear is the biggest motivation for a young person to pick up a knife in the first place. So I want us to consider how we can help our children feel safer, and we'll explore that as we go through the session. But having conversations with our children about the reality of knife crime, about, dispelling the myths about carrying knives. Not everyone's carrying knives. You're less safe if you carry a knife. The safest thing to do if someone pulled out a knife is run and go and get help, not to fight it off. Young people might think, I need to, brave it and face up to the conflict, because if I don't, then I'm going to be a laughing stock. Everyone's going to be um, like grilling me for weeks about it. Well, actually, they're not. Next week, they'll be talking about something else. The best thing you can do is run away and get help. We are going to listen to a short clip from ITV News. This is an interviewer who's talking to a young person and their mum in Gloucester. So that's like the West Country, sort of a bit near Wales, the border of Wales. Um, this is not knife crime that's necessarily linked to gangs, criminal gangs. This is just everyday young people that might live in another part of the country. It's really important to listen to the voices of young people when we talk about knife crime. Okay. So that may be themes that you're already familiar with. You may have had conversations about this before with young people or parents, or it might be shocking as well to hear this. This is the sad reality for some young people that they feel they have to carry a knife if they leave the house, or they can't leave the house because it doesn't feel safe out there. That interviewer also spoke about a lack of interventions, a lack of youth services for young people. I'm going to encourage you at the end of the session to have a look at the Humber Violence Prevention Partnership website so you can see all the links to the support that's available in your area. Okay, this is a quote from a young person who, when interviewed by the BBC News, when zombie knives were banned, they said, if my knife is bigger than theirs, I'm going to win. Now, of course, there are no winners in knife crime. Whether a child is murdered or a child kills someone or hurts someone else, those children's lives are gone forever and their families around them traumatized forever. The isolation that comes with that, people starting to distance themselves for you know, reasons that maybe I don't want to associate with that person. They've lost their child. There's knife crime involved. What if it brings trouble to my child's door, etc., etc. It's very complicated and it's really isolating. We need to have conversations with our children about knife crime, um, and make it age appropriate. And we'll look more towards that at the end of the session. Okay, I'm going to talk about gangs now, but why am I talking about gangs? Well, like I said at the start, not all knife crime is gang related, but knife crime is um is associated with gang life. So we have to consider it when we talk about this. Now, when I'm talking about gangs, I'm not simply talking about groups of kids that hang out together, groups of kids in the town centre. I'm talking about criminal gangs. I'm talking about gangs who are recognisable, a distinct group, who are recognisable as this distinct group to other similar groups and engage in a range of criminal activity and violence. So that criminal activity could be anything from the selling of drugs. So those drugs might be Class A drugs, such as crack cocaine or heroin or cocaine, or um, Class B drugs like ketamine, cannabis, etc. This street gang, if they are selling Class A drugs, it's likely they will have a link to an organised crime network, and that organised crime network will be obtaining those substances from abroad. So they'll be involved in the international import of drugs. So alongside selling drugs, and we'll look at that business model in more detail in a minute, they could also be involved in different theft offences. So it could be things like stealing cars, shoplifting, street robberies, burglaries, and also fraud. So stealing people's cards and using it to make purchases online. Some gangs are involved in the financial exploitation of children. So it could be that a criminal gang befriends a young person, grooms that young person, makes them believe that they are part of their group, their gang, and they may ask them to transfer some money into their bank account or set up a bank account specifically so that this money can be transferred into there. Why are they doing this? So if a gang has made lots of money from selling drugs, they need to legitimize those notes, that hard cash. So they don't want to put it into their own bank accounts, quite naturally. So they will use children or vulnerable adults and their bank accounts to deposit the money into it. And then that money will be sent onto another account, another account, another account, until eventually it becomes legitimized, and then it can be used to make purchases. For young people, they might not realize the severity of what they've become involved in. They may not know it's exploitation. They might not know that it's to do with money laundering. They might think they're doing someone a favor. So it could be they're being asked, oh, can you just do me a favor? My bank account's closed at the minute. Can you send this money to my girlfriend? And for whatever reason, the child or young person says, yeah, okay. They might have been given gifts, food, vapes, Robux, V-Bucks. They might have been given all of these things in order to create like a obligation towards the gang to give something back. So, well, we've given all you all this stuff. So actually, what you're going to do for us, you can't say no to us. So the child then deposits the money, transfers the money, and unwittingly becomes involved in money laundering. Or the child might be more upfront than that, and the groomer, the exploiter, says to the child, we'll give you 100 quid if you deposit this money and send it on. And it seems too good to be true. That's because it is, because it comes with those dangers of what it is to be in a gang. And we'll look at that in more detail in a minute. For young people who may have been exploited in this way financially, if that gang is then investigated financially or for any of their criminal activity, it's likely their bank accounts or any bank account associated with that activity will be frozen. And if a bank account is frozen, then it's really impossible for the child to obtain any assets that might be within that bank account. It could make it harder for them to open another bank account. It could be harder for them, therefore, to apply for education, to apply for jobs, housing, all of those things that we need bank accounts for. Now, when I'm talking about street gangs like this, I'm not necessarily talking about the larger organised crime groups. But their activity does overlap, and often that the organised crime groups are perhaps controlling the activity of the, lower level street gangs that might be moving drugs around, for example. The social environment of being in a street gang gives young people opportunities to gain status, respect, influence. Young people may join or associate with gangs not just for the protection or the belonging. Young people have said to me, you're safer if you're with the gang than without them. Pick a side, basically, because otherwise you'll be in the middle of two gangs and then you're a victim of both. So pick a side. But young people also associate with gangs because it offers them a way to build a social status that's meaningful in their environment, especially if there is a lack of opportunity for things like education or jobs. So let's look at the business model of a drugs gang, for example. So a street gang that is selling drugs. Just like any other organisation, there will be a hierarchy. At the top of the tree, you've got the CEO. They oversee, overall operations of the gang, the faces, the elders. They will be hugely feared and respected. Not old, generally men, but not exclusively, not older than your 40s. It's a young person's lifestyle. You, of course, get people who are well into their 40s, 50s, 60s that are in larger organised crime networks. But when we think about the street level gangs that we're talking about, it's a real young person's lifestyle. It's not sustainable. Below them, you're going to have the middle managers, the elders. So these are generally children who are around 16, 17 into their 20s. They're in charge of street level operations, recruitment, so grooming. They will be in charge, well, they'll be involved in violence and crime themselves as well, finding out the needs of the market. So what drugs are needed where can we source that from? How are we going to get that there? How are we going to resource those sales in that area? And then you've got the youngers who are like the shop floor workers of the organisation, the minions, if you like. There we go. Go out and do the task that they're dictated to by the elders or the faces. Now let's think about the age of these children. So that'll be anything from the age of 10 plus. And if we think about children's brains at this point of development, they are not yet fully formed cognitively, so not yet understanding consequences fully. Our brains aren't fully formed until our mid-20s. So not understanding consequences. Their brains by design are made to seek excitement and take risks. Why is that? It's all part of the natural development into young adulthood. But that's a real heady mix to have, not understanding consequences, taking risks, seeking excitement, and you're in a very adult criminal world. And then you've got the freelancers of the organisation. So the runners, the shotters, they're the people that might be employed on an ad hoc basis to move drugs around or to move weapons around or firearms. And then you've got the tiny. So anyone under the age of 10. Why on earth would anyone under the age of 10 be useful to a criminal gang? Well, they're under the age of criminal responsibility for a start, so they can't be arrested. They are not going to be stopped and searched. They're often not really considered or looked at or seen as being involved in criminality, of course. And they're really easy to manipulate, aren't they? They're really cheap labour. So you could give a child sweets, food, Robux or FIFA points or any other sort of digital currency for gaming, and they'll do a job. They are cheap labour and they're easy to manipulate. If you consider your own children, if I think about my 9-year-old, if I were to say to him, I'll give you 1,700 Robux, so digital currency on Roblox, if you take this parcel and drop it through our neighbour's house over there, he'd do it in a heartbeat like that. Now you might think, well, you're his mum, so he trusts you. But gangs and groomers are really good at creating those false senses of trust. You might say, well, you're his mum and you've asked him to do it, and that's why he's done it. but he is my second born. Therefore, he does absolutely nothing I ask him to, ever. Certainly not the first time, anyway. So that's the basic model of a business gang. It won't be only 6 people, of course. I mean, some gangs, some street gangs can be up to, hundreds of young people dotted around an area, and they all come together when they need to come together. But let's have a look at how this works around the UK and how that drugs market looks. So you may or may not have heard of the term county lines before. So county lines is the name given to a telephone number that is owned and controlled by a criminal gang, a drugs gang, who are exporting drugs or importing drugs to different parts of the country in the UK. So the county line is the telephone number that drug users, whether habitual drug users or social drug users, might use to contact the drugs gang to buy the product. So, traditionally we didn't have this model where drugs were necessarily being moved around the country and young people were being exploited and trafficked across the country, from Liverpool down to Devon and Cornwall. This wasn't happening 25 years ago. You had local drug dealers who would sell their product. When they sold out, they'd sold out. Drug users, the customers would have to go elsewhere. However, this is a terrible business model, and alongside advancements in technology, we have become, as consumers, legal or not, we have become used to a 24/7 culture. So business-wise, it doesn't make sense to not be able to fulfill the needs of your customer base. The number that is owned by these gangs, this county line number, can be a hefty piece of capital for the gang. And if they're looking at making some quick money, they can sell that telephone number. If it's got a good, strong customer base, they can sell that telephone number to an up and coming drugs running gang. So traditionally, they will use young people, children, or vulnerable adults to move drugs around the country. Children will be going missing for long periods of time. Families, of course, fraught with worry and fear. Vulnerable adults having their homes taken over by drugs gangs where they'll sell drugs from. That still happens. You may or may not recognise it as happening in parts of your own communities. Children were often sent across the country and set up in fake robberies. So they'd be robbed by the gang of the drugs or the money they were holding, and then forced by the gang to work free until that debt was paid off. Of course, they're never going to pay that debt off. It's a trap. Now, young people who are seen as being involved in county lines, they're victims of criminal exploitation. Adult gang members or adults who are moving children from A to B, who are trafficking children, can be prosecuted under the Modern Slavery Act. And what's really powerful to understand about this is investigators don't need statements from children or video evidence from children. It's an evidence-led prosecution. So the case is built around the offender, the adult, the abuser, not the child. Now, traditionally, children were being moved around the UK, so they'd go missing for long periods of time. For many reasons, we'll come on to them in a minute. County lines has changed and it's becoming more localised. So there are fewer lines running outside the police force boundaries and fewer children recorded by the police as involved in any capacity. Cross-country human trafficking has become too high a risk enterprise for gangs. It's too obvious. If you've got a child from Birmingham that turns up in London, or if you've got a child in London that turns up in Hull, it's too obvious. They stick out like a sore thumb. That accent's not recognisable. What are you doing here? It's too risky for the gang. It draws too much attention to their activity. So what's happening is you might have gangs from out of areas. So thinking about Humberside, you might have gangs coming along from West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, and coming along with their business model, but to recruit local young children. Still getting them exploiting them with the same tactics, same recruitment tactics, um, and still moving children around from A to B. It doesn't have to be a massive distance. It hasn't got to be across to another town or another county. It can be from one street to the next. An adult cannot move a child from A to B and criminal activity take place. That is human trafficking. So just to have a look at how that looks now. So traditionally, recruitment of young people took place in the exporting area, so the big cities like Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, and then moved across the country to the importing area. However, now because of the disruption towards that business model, policing of transport networks, missing children being scrutinised, what's been happening to these children that have been going missing, and the Modern Slavery Act is too high risk. So gangs are coming into more localised areas and recruiting young people in the local importing area instead. So I'm going to send you the links when we send out resources, and it's going to contain the full documentary where that excerpt has been taken from if you want to watch it at your leisure. So some of the themes that come out of that is a man who's exploiting children, speaking about it as if it's very normalized. He said, even himself, he wanted to be a drug dealer. It's all he ever knew. He talks about if you're man enough to do the thing, you're man enough to pay the price. Don't violate the gang. Don't go against the gang. You're man enough to want to undertake being involved in this, then deal with it. These aren't man enough. These are children who have been exploited, that haven't necessarily got free will or full understanding of what they are being dragged into. We heard about from the other guy saying, I've got 5 kids are already involved in it. His own children. Again, it seems intergenerational, that he perhaps has only ever known this life, therefore his kids have only ever known this life. And it's normal to them. They spoke about, well, it seems like a bad life at first, but it gets good. At what point is any of that getting good? Getting beaten up, getting water tortured, living in conditions like that. So, depending on the age of your child, I would suggest thinking about teenage age children and above. You might want to show them videos or documentaries around county lines, about exploitation, about gangs, to start having those conversations about the reality of it. You know your child best. And if you don't feel like your child is ready to have the conversation, then just start slowly, small little snippets of conversations. And we'll talk about that in more detail a bit later on. Remember, if you've got any questions or any comments or anything, just pop it in the Q&A field and we will answer them at the end of the session. Okay, we're going to talk about social media for a moment. We know that we're all using our devices more than ever, especially young people, particularly if they've only grown up knowing about the existence of smartphones and tablets and iPads and all of those things. We know that YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat are the most popular social media platforms for young people. We also understand that algorithms on social media platforms determine what material is directed towards users based on, who they are, their demographics, where they live, and also user interaction. So as an example, I am a middle-aged woman. So the stuff that comes my way on Instagram will be about the menopause, collagen supplements, and sausage dogs. Sausage dogs are my fault. Those 2 little sausages that you see on your screen there are my own sausage dogs. And because of that, I tend to look at sausage dogs more than is probably healthy on Instagram. And the algorithms recognize this. So they send me more and more sausage dogs. Keep her online. That's how they make their money. She loves a sausage dog. Chuck more her way. It will keep her online. It will keep her active. They get money from endorsements. In fact, I saw something that I thought was unreal today. It was about YouTube, that people who are in sales, so who are marketing, they give money to YouTube in order to have their adverts there. And then sometimes the user pays YouTube money to have the adverts banned. So like have ad free, like you get ad free games and those sorts of things. So what a lucrative business to be in, that you're getting people to pay you to show their adverts, but you're also getting people to pay you to not show them adverts. It's a really lucrative business. Now, going back to sausage dogs, if you think about if I didn't know better, if I didn't have a balanced view of the world, I might think that sausage dogs were the only dogs that were available, which thankfully they're not, because they're really annoying. If anyone's got them, you'll understand. But let's use this analogy and apply it to young people and what young people might be seeing. So young people are not going to be seeing stuff about the menopause and gardening and other middle-aged women topics. They're going to be seeing things that are applicable and relevant to their age, where they live, and also their interaction. They're not going to be rewatching reels about sausage dog behaviour, but they might be watching stuff about young people in their area. They might be watching things about fights that have happened, not necessarily in their area, somewhere. Remember, teenage brains, they're novelty seeking, they're designed to take risks. They're curious, naturally. We want young people to be curious. If they're seeing things online, they might rewatch it to try and understand it. Like, what am I looking at here? And because of that, the algorithms recognize it, and they might send more and more material of that nature to that young person. And what can happen is it can build a bit of a confirmation bias. So if a child is searching for material, so for example, if they searched, is knife crime a thing in Grimsby, then they might be sent material about knife crime in Grimsby. Now, Grimsby hasn't necessarily got high levels of knife crime compared to other parts of the UK, but the algorithms will give the user the material that the user might want to hear, might not necessarily want to hear, but is searching for. And that builds that confirmation bias. Oh, well, I searched for it and it's telling me about knife crime in Grimsby, so therefore it must be an issue. And that's just not the case. Um, young people might be seeing lifestyles or music videos or violence and fights, and they might think that this is normality, that this is actually the only option in life. But let's actually consider the tangible effects of this. So that study that I spoke about at the start of the session with the Youth Endowment Fund, over 10,000 young people in England and Wales, 70% of them had encountered real world violence online in the last year. So this is in 2024. No surprise there, I'm sure. 80% of teenagers who saw violent content online felt less safe in their local communities because of it. So regardless of where that violence took place online, they felt less safe where they live. But the real tangible consequences are this: 68% are less likely to venture outside. So where does that put young people? Where does it push them? Back in their rooms, back on their devices. 39% of them stated it made them more likely to carry a weapon themselves. So just because of seeing things online. I was on Instagram a couple of months ago and I happened to see a video of a teenage boy putting a flick knife into his shin pad before going to play football. Now, I know the majority of young people do not carry flick knives in their shin pads. But if I was a young person, maybe about to embark on playing sports in my local area, I might think, wow, is this what people have to do? Maybe I need to do that too. I did try and report that video, but apparently it didn't breach community standards. So we go again. Report anything that you see that you think is unsafe for young people. Just keep reporting it. 64% of teenagers who used violence said that social media played a role in their behaviour, such as online arguments or the escalation of existing conflicts that were happening, in real life. I'm going to talk to you about I'm going to tell you the story about a boy called Ollie Stevens. So this is a real story. It's a tragic story. We have supported and worked alongside the Stevens family for a number of years now. Before I talk to you about what happened to Ollie, I'm going to talk to you about Ollie as a person because I don't like to sum up people's lives in what happened to them because they are whole human beings as well. So Ollie, as a young child, was really well liked. He had a very funny sense of humour. He was a very typical young boy. He loved Minecraft. He loved his bike. Um, he was really popular in primary school, and he was kind as well. He really did look after other children, perhaps other children that were lonely at lunch or who were isolated for any reason. There's a lovely mural on his old primary school, and it's a picture of him holding, it's like a painting of him holding the hand of a younger child. And it's just, oh, it's lovely to see. Um, Ollie was given a smartphone the year that he was going to secondary school. So this was 2019 when he went to secondary school. And, you know, my eldest went to secondary school in 2019. And yet, as parents, we did just dish those smartphones out without even thinking. Didn't really know how harmful social media was for our children's well-being and everything else. Um, Ollie struggled with the transition from primary to secondary school. He struggled for many different reasons, and he also struggled with friendships. He eventually sort of became attached to a peer group who were in the year above. So he was still in year 7 and they were in year 8 when they sort of first became attached. In year 7, he was diagnosed with autism. And at this time, he was also excluded from school for disruptive behaviour. And I mean, most of us know now that mainstream schools aren't necessarily the most therapeutic space for SEN children, so children with additional needs. And that can lead to behaviour difficulties within that environment. So Ollie was cut off from school, he was excluded, and this was a bad year anyway. It was 2020, so it was lockdown year. So a very isolating time for everyone. So excluded from school, he was very addicted to his phone. His dad talks about how he'd become really upset if it was ever confiscated. He was really being manipulated by that peer group, the people that were in year 8. They were setting him up to be robbed of his bike, which was a beloved bike to him. His mum was starting to notice that he was spending more and more time in random places. So she'd look on the like iPhone, find my iPhone and see that he was like on the other side of town or on a train going into a city, but with no reason. She'd phone him up and say, Ollie, it's getting late now, you're going to come home. And he did come home. He would come home at that point. Leading up to Christmas 2020, he was online when he saw a video going around of a young boy being humiliated, being patterned, as it was described. And he alerted the older brother of that young boy. There's this video going around. And from that point onwards, Ollie was labelled as a snitch by his peer group. And he was being threatened online. He became very withdrawn. His parents really tried over that Christmas period to get him to talk about what was going on, what was happening. Ollie had a social worker appointed to him at this time, and the social worker had managed to sort of just about get through to him, like, these aren't your friends. They're not looking out for you. They haven't got your back. And Ollie was starting to realise that. January the 3rd, 2021, so it's still in the sort of school holiday period. Ollie's now in year 8. And Ollie arranges to meet up with a friend, a female friend who's 14. So he was 13, she was 14. And they were just literally meeting at a field 30 seconds walk from their house. And he left the house as normal. Bye, mum, love you. And he was wearing socks and sliders, even though it was January. The girl said, oh, we're only meeting up for a chat. You don't need to wear trainers. Ollie got there and he had been set up by this girl. And the two boys who had been threatening him online, his peers, were there, and they started to attack Ollie. One of them pulled out a knife and they stabbed Ollie once in the chest and once in the back, and Ollie collapsed. He lost his life on the field that day. There was a cardiac nurse that was walking past with her dog. She wasn't able to save him. The HEMS helicopter came. They weren't able to save him. The investigation that followed into Ollie's murder found that this was an orchestrated attack. He was set up for being labelled a snitch. And he was being sent threats by these peer groups, these alleged friends. They were showing videos of knives. They had these online personas as if they were, in those gangs that we've been speaking about earlier. They weren't, but they were emulating that online. There was a voice note from the girl who was saying, "You have no idea how excited I am about today, about setting him up." The reason why she got him to wear socks and sliders is so that he couldn't run away when he was being attacked. She was found guilty of manslaughter, and the two boys involved were found guilty of murder. Ollie's family do so much work now in trying to create safer online spaces and also safer real world spaces. They do lots of fundraising for us at the Trust so we can deliver workshops for young people, but also for loads of other youth organisations, particularly focused around children with, special educational needs. The reason I tell you this story is not to scare you. It's just for us to see that, such a small thing can happen online and it can lead to, everyone's worst nightmare. But it's not just the influences of peers and the influences of the area that you grow up in or you live in. There are loads of other influences. And on the screen, excuse me, my dogs have they've just gone wild. My boys got in from football and they're obviously excited. And relax. On the screen, you're going to see some images. You might recognize some, you might not. And we're going to talk through these in a minute. So on the top left there, you've got Grand Theft Auto, which is a video game that it's violent. It's 18 plus, so it shouldn't be played by anyone under the age of 18 anyway. It's about gang life in America. It's really changed in its appearance and its gameplay since it was first created. It's been around for years. I used to play the very first version. It's about stealing cars, selling drugs, killing people. It's very violent. My eldest plays it. Do I think it's going to cause him to commit violence? No. I think there's got to be lots of things going on in a child's life for a video game to also have that kind of influence. And I'm going to apply this to us as adults. I'm sure there's many of us, me included, that watch true crime documentaries, serial killer documentaries. You might like horror films. Does it mean that we're all serial killers? No, of course not. It's a form of entertainment in a macabre way. Human beings are interested in the macabre, interested in something that seems so inhumane. Top Boy is a Netflix series that is around inner city gang life. It's really accurate. I recommend watching it as a series. It doesn't glamorize it. It just shows it for what it is. It's horrible. It's traumatic. No one's healthy. No one's living their best life. Top right there, you've got YouTube. Not that this is the only thing that you see on YouTube, of course. This is an example of a YouTube channel. You've got 35,000 subscribers, and the creator of this YouTube channel talks about different gangs, gang activities, what different gangs are up to, what beef they've got with each other, etc., etc. Just to be aware that it's out there and it's available. There are other types of content like this. And then bottom right, you've got UK drill, which is music, and we'll look at music in a minute. Before we do that, I just want to show you some of the newest versions of these Roblox games. So I'm sure you're all aware of Roblox. Roblox is a gaming platform where anyone who has the ability can create and upload video games. Basically, it's a free platform, and most games have sort of like in-app purchases. That's how they make their money. These are some of the games that have been created around that lifestyle that we've been discussing, that gang life. I'm not going to go through all of them. Just be aware that, like Trap and Bang is a game about selling drugs, criminal enterprise, looking after yourself, loss of life. You can see there's people, the characters in that thumbnail image there. You've got knives there. There are different versions of it. So you've got a North version of Trap and Bang, Trap Line Motion, which is another version of being in a gang running drugs around. Some of these have been set to maturity level set to minimal, which means that pretty much any age of user can play it. The maturity on Trap and Bang there is set to moderate, which I double checked today, and it's actually the age of 9+, which is frightening because I've played Trap and Bang just to see what it's about. It's horribly realistic. The sound effects, the blood loss, it's horrendous. So it's just really a reminder for us to just be mindful of the games our kids are playing on these platforms, because it's easy to sort of like give him an iPad. My kid's 9, he's an iPad kid, he grew up he's Gen Alpha, but it's important to do it alongside them, hence why I got myself a Roblox account just so I can see what it's all about and understand it, and also connect with him because that's what he's interested in, so we'll play games together as well. It doesn't always have to be the app's dangerous or this is scary. There are other apps that we may or may not be aware of. I'm going to send you a link in our resources to some online sort of toolkits, so you can understand very quickly what Grand Theft Auto is about, what Roblox is about, what Discord is about, because really it can be so confusing. There are so many platforms, there's so many like security settings and privacy settings, and it can be really overwhelming as a parent to know where to start. Okay, we're going to look at some music, but before we do that, we're going to look at some slang words. Why am I showing slang words? Well, these slang words are generally historically attached to gang words, gang slang, gang language, gang life. Now, we're going to look at these words through that lens. We're not going to look at them as if they're in the Oxford English Dictionary. And I'll just work through them, and we can make some notes if you want to make the notes of what they mean. Now, if a child is using any of these words, it doesn't mean they're in a gang. My youngest uses one of these words to describe his older brother, and that word is ops. Ops means rival or enemy. It's a lovely environment I've created at home. Yes, my 9-year-old calls his 18-year-old his op, his rival. Is my 9-year-old in a gang? No. Is he being exploited? Touch wood, no. So these words can spill into general youth culture. It doesn't always have to be the sub-youth culture of gang life that can be attractive to some young people. Right, let's go through it. So trap is selling drugs. Trapping is selling drugs. A trap house would be the place that drugs are sold from or prepared in. So trap houses are also called a bando, as in bando, which is short for abandoned, because it used to be traditionally like a old abandoned flat or warehouse. You might have seen the clothing brand Trapstar. Listen, if children wear Trapstar, it doesn't mean they're in a gang, but again, it's sort of that sort of emulation, like yeah, I'm a little bit street, I'm a little bit road. Hack is drugs. Bands is money, so the elastic bands that go around stacks of money. OT is in relation to county line, so out there, out trapping, out of town. Ops, we spoke about, is rivals. Ramsey is knife. You might also hear ZK for zombie knife or Flicky for flick knife. Ride out is going out into rival territory, like no man's land. No one from this side goes into that side. I know, again, just from meeting people from Hull City Football Club, they were talking to me about they run events in one part of Hull and they won't get the kids from the other side of Hull to be able to come along to the event. Not necessarily because there's gang violence, but it's just not the done thing. It's seen as like rival territory. Get back is revenge. Smurf is a child who is being financially exploited, which is what we spoke about earlier on. Dipped is being stabbed. Other terms might be shanked, juked, poked, murked, splashed, wetted. It goes on and on. Bagging is stabbing someone in the abdomen or rectum so that they have to wear a colostomy bag. So some young people believe, or some people believe, that there are safe places to stab someone on the body. There absolutely isn't. You can bleed out, of course, from an injury in your abdomen, in your rectum. There's a video on a website called Street Doctors, and I'll send you the link to that as well. The video is called The Fatal Question, and it's called Is There a Safe Place to Stab Someone? It's a very emotional watch. I'd recommend watching it and then considering whether it's worth showing to your older child, so an adolescent or teenager. So you can start having those conversations about, is there a safe place to stab someone? No, of course not. You can bleed out from anywhere. You can bleed out from the wound of a knife that has a 1-inch blade on it. If you're penetrating your skin's your largest organ, then you are, of course, creating a space for blood loss wherever that wound is. Okay, we're going to look at drill music. You may or may not have heard of drill music before. There's a reason why I showed you some of these slang words, because on the screen there, you've got in the lower boxes, you've got some lyrics from some popular drill tracks. So drill music emerged from South London in the early 2010s. It's originally from Chicago, but it got a massive uplift in the UK. It's very generalized, violent or gritty lyrics about selling drugs, killing people, guns, making money, etc. The beat used is a very specific 808 beat. It's very recognizable. It's very dark. It's very repetitive. On the screen, you've got lyrics by Digger D and Central C. They're both massive UK drill artists. Central C is probably really quite mainstream now. If you've got Apple Music or Spotify and you go on there and type in UK drill, you'll see how popular drill music is. The lyrics here for Central C: let's see if you really trap. You ain't ever sat in the trap with a pack. Hear the doorbell ring and your heartbeat lag. I might put the bando on Airbnb. Rest in peace, A1. It's sad that he didn't see 18. So normalizing being in a trap house, selling drugs, normalizing that stress of that life, his heartbeat's lagging. Can't take it anymore. Might put the trap house, the bando on Airbnb. Rest in peace, A1. So normalizing someone losing their life before they even got to 18. Digger D on the left there. I don't need to explain the lyrics. Blood on my Rambo, blood on my kitchen, blood on my cutlass, blood on my flickting. I had his flesh on my knife when I dipped him, swung at his face and ripped it. Now, we might be horrified by these lyrics, but I also want us to be mindful about music we might have listened to growing up and the lyrics of those tracks as well. Every generation appears to be, frightened naturally of the next generation's music and the themes in that music. Now, the conversation has been had many times. Does general drill music like this Does it incite violence? And it's not legally inciting violence, it's speaking about violence or speaking about horrible things that have happened. But we've had explicit content in music for decades. And you would see this music would have an 18 plus certificate on it to be listened to, just like horror films, just like awful programs that we watch about, complicated and harrowing themes. There is a difference, though, between general drill music and gang-related drill music. So, gang-related drill music is music of that genre that is made by the criminal gangs that we spoke about earlier. Now, why is this different? Because the lyrics within this are hyper localized. And what that means is they are talking about actual events that have happened or inciting events to take place against rival gang members or rival gangs. But because it's made by local people, it can give a real tangible appeal to some young people. Um, Now, you might think that you haven't got, necessarily street gangs that operate in your towns around Humberside, but you will have in the larger cities that you might be close to. So if you're thinking about some of the gangs in around Leeds and Bradford, if you were to go on YouTube and type in drill gang Leeds or drill gang West Yorkshire or Wakefield or any of those bits, you'll see some artists come about from that. I mean, if you want to definitely see some drill music, if you type in drill music South London, you'll see tons of it. The tangible effect is real because they might be seeing local people who have done good. They're making money, even if it is illegally. They've got cars in these videos. They're very well and professionally made. Children might appear in the background of the videos. They've got the gang members front and center with their faces covered. Loads of children in the background without their faces covered, just because it's something to do, or they feel like they're a part of something, not realizing that as soon as their face is uploaded to a music video that's gang associated, then they're going to be associated with that gang. They're going to be at risk of, the politics, the dangerous politics that applies to that gang. So again, let's speak to our children about these music videos, the lyrics, because actually you might speak to your kids about the lyrics and they're like, I've never heard them, mum. Or, yeah, I hear them, they're on the back of TikToks, I don't care. So it gives us an understanding. It might put our minds at rest if we have these conversations. You never know, you might even become a massive UK drill fan yourself, or maybe not. Now, if we think about children who have been exploited, it's important to recognise that these children will be exposed to and experience repeated violence, abuse, fear, and stress. It is a 24/7 lifestyle. And that repeated chronic exposure to life-threatening situations affects brain development. It can affect stress responses, communication, behaviour, all of those things that are reliant on us having benevolent experiences in childhood, healthy experiences in childhood. So young people might also develop unhealthy coping strategies to manage the trauma that they're experiencing. This might happen anyway, even if a child hasn't been exploited into a gang or they haven't been affected by knife crime personally. But even just hearing about violence or seeing violence online can bring about those stress responses. They can put that child into a sort of fight flight response. So again, be curious as to what's happening for our children on there, but also out there, like what's happening at school, what's the general conversations that are being had around safety. How would we know if our child is being exploited? Well, your gut feeling, really, as their parent, you are best placed to trust your instincts that something isn't right. These are the signs and symptoms of children who are being exploited. It might not be all of these things. It might be one of these things. So it might be sexually transmitted diseases. We know that young people, boys and girls, are sexually abused once they've been groomed. It could be child to parent violence. So children who are exploited are more likely to be violent towards their parents and carers. They might, smash the place up because they're desperate to leave the house to go and work for the gang because they know if they don't go out and do a shift for the gang, they're going to be in more trouble. It could be that they're scared to go to school and they're scared to leave the house, which, isn't dissimilar to what we heard in that first video that I showed you from ITV News when the mum was saying, my child doesn't even leave the house now. It could be extreme secrecy around phones, all of a sudden having friendships with older people that we don't know. So trust your instincts. It won't let you down as a parent. And there is help out there if you do feel or you find out, something's happening, your child is being exploited or groomed. I'm going to show you where you can get help from at the end of the session. So how do we help our children stay safe? We're not here to tell our children what to do. We know, God, if you know my second child, it doesn't work. It does not work to tell your child what to do. But we are here to listen, guide, and empower them, steer them along the right tracks of, the morals that we've instilled in them since they've been born. We can encourage young people to consider 3 things to stay safe, and we call these the safeties. Safeties? Safeties? I know. It took me ages to think of that. I'm not even sure I'm that impressed with myself for it either. So what are the safeties? Trust instincts, take a breath, and talk to a trusted adult. So, trust and instincts. I want you to think of a time when you've ever had a gut feeling about a situation or a person or something, and that gut feeling was wrong. Not a cognitive thought, a gut feeling. And I'm going to make a massive sweeping assumption that you have never been wrong. Your gut feeling has never been wrong about anything, and it never will, because your belly is your best friend. It will always be honest with you. It will always have your back, and it will always want the best for you. It's designed to keep you alive. It's designed for survival. And when our survival is being threatened for whatever reason, whether it's someone that's just not good for us, someone that's toxic for us, a situation that's not healthy for us, our gut feeling, that message will be sent to our brain. By the time the message gets sent to our brain might override it. Oh, you're being dramatic, you're making a big deal out of it again. And we might play it down. But that gut feeling is the truth. It's your best friend. It will never lie to you. Now, speaking to our children about their gut feelings is a powerful first step in helping them stay safe, helping them recognize when a situation is not safe for them or a relationship isn't safe for them. Now, on top of that, children might have difficulty in stepping away from that situation because they don't want to miss out. So the whole FOMO thing, oh, I don't want to leave because all my mates are here. And if I leave, I won't know what they're doing or I'll feel left out. That attachment starts to feel fractured. But also young people might not know how to leave a situation. They might not know what to say. I do have a bit of a safety plan with my eldest, who, even though he's 18, we've sort of still got it in place. I know that if he's anywhere and he sends me an emoji of an ice cream, I know that he's in trouble or he wants picking up. So I'll check his location on location app and I'll go get him. Now, it might not be that. Sorry, the reason it's ice cream is because it makes him gag. And I know there is no way on earth he would ever be talking about ice cream. Other ways that children can sort of feel empowered to leave a situation without feeling like it's them making the decision is by blaming an adult. They're the reason they've got to leave. I've got to go because if I don't go, mum's coming down. She's wearing a dressing gown and Crocs. I've got to go. Or it could be blame another adult. No, I've got an appointment with a youth worker. No, I've got an appointment with whoever. I've got to be there. If I don't, they're going to come down and have a, they're going to be here looking for us. And no children, no other children want that kind of adult interaction, that adult intervention, if you like. Blame the adult. Have that safety plan with your child so that they feel empowered, that if they have a gut feeling, they know that you're aware of what to do if they send out sort of the bat signal, whether it's an ice cream emoji or whatever suits you guys. Have that conversation. The second powerful step that children can do, or young people can do, is take a breath when there's conflict. So if someone's been triggered or provoked by something, an action, or humiliated by a peer, might have been sent a message that was horrible, that young person might then start operating from their survival brain. So whilst we're working out of our survival brain, we cannot access our thinking brain, which helps with decision making, problem solving, and understanding consequences. So how can we get ourselves out of our survival brain? Taking a breath. There is not a single situation where we haven't got time to take one single breath, a deep breath, a proper breath. Or 5 seconds. It's so powerful to take those deep breaths. It slows our breathing down, which in turn slows our heart rate down, which calms our nervous system. Our nervous system's connected to our brainstem, which is where our survival brain sits at the top of that. If we can calm our survival brain and get us out of fight or flight, we can then move up through the brain. In the middle part of the brain, that's where we feel emotions. So recognize, what emotions am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling them? You've got to name them to tame them. Top part of the brain is the thinking brain. This is where you consider the consequences and also make the positive choices that have the better outcomes, the healthy outcomes, the safe outcomes. There's a real difference in a trigger or an event and someone reacting immediately with it and those outcomes than a trigger, an event, and someone taking a breath, recognizing they're angry, slowing things down, thinking about the consequences, thinking about what they can do to de-escalate a situation, and then perhaps still responding, or maybe not, because time has passed. This is literally like being given the gift of time travel. You can pause time, step away from the situation physically if you're there, step away from the phone, put down the device if it's something online. Now, for lots of young people, they already know what steps to take to de-escalate conflict, but sometimes you need advice from someone else. Doesn't matter how old we are, in fact, we all need advice from our friends, our family in difficult times. Not that we want them to tell us what to do. Sometimes we just need to use them as a sounding board to be able to almost logically work out what the situation is that we're in and what we can do to help it. But children are more likely to seek the support and listen to the advice of adults when they are treated equally, non-judgmentally, and listened to and treated with respect. But young people might be worried to speak to us. They might be worried about our reactions. They might be concerned about if they tell us something, they're going to get in trouble. There's millions of different reasons why our children might be worried about bringing something up. So we might need to bring it up first. So some of the things that we can ask our children, depending on their age and their ability, again, you know your child best. These are some of the prompts that we can use. So like, where do you go that feels safe? Why does it feel safe there? So it could be, like if you're out in the park and some people came down and they were difficult or you just didn't really like them, where would you go that felt safe? And, your child might say, oh, I'd go to my mate's house, Tom, he lives 2 streets away from the park. And his mum always lets me in. It's safe there. That is safety planning. That is having a conversation just in case a situation like that arises in the future. But you can have conversations about other things as well, like what's your best ways to de-escalate a situation? What would you do if you're in a situation that was bubbling away and building up? How would you de-escalate that? And have the conversations when, you're at rest with the child, not, when the conflict is happening. But it's best to have these conversations when the child is at rest, when they are regulated with us, when they're safe at home, when they're feeling comfortable. Conversations don't need to take place, across the table, right? That's it, we're sitting down talking about knife crime. You can literally just have conversations here and there about, little topics or big topics, but in little snippets. So driving the car, if you're out walking the dog, sometimes it's easier to have conversations where you're not looking directly at each other. It's easier if it's sort of side to side, although expect some side eyes from your teenagers. Um, with regards to age appropriate content, what the sort of topics you are going to be talking about, it's again dependent on your children. Please do have a look at our social media pages. If you go onto Instagram or Facebook or whatever your poison is on social media, type in Ben Kinsella Trust. We put a post out recently regarding age appropriate conversations. And it sort of gives an age range, if child's between 7 and 11, perhaps talk about it in a very general way, like, is there anything that you see online that makes you feel unsafe? Or do you ever hear anything about knife crime? More relaxed and less in depth. And then as you move up the ages, it becomes more about friendships and peer pressure. And as they get much older, 14, 15, 16, then you want to talk about, the real consequences, the real impact of violence and knife crime. Children can often feel worried about telling us something because they don't want to be labelled a snitch. And that's completely natural, of course. We heard about what happened with Ollie, and he was labelled a snitch and he lost his life. Now, Ollie was a kind person. He was almost murdered for his morals. And we don't want children to stop being kind. We want children to speak out when something is wrong or harmful. So we can help children realise that they can share information without it coming back to them. So you may or may not have heard of an organisation called fearless.org. Fearless.org is a branch of Crime Stoppers, but it's directed towards children. It's actually a really user-friendly website. It's probably, much more user-friendly than Crime Stoppers. It's got loads of like downloadable workshops on there and downloadable posters and bits and bobs about different things to help us get a better understanding about what's actually going on around there, as well as our kids. But Fearless is also a place where young people can report things that they are worried about. So it could be they're reporting someone that they know is carrying a knife, or they know that someone at school is being groomed into a gang, or someone at school has been threatening to hurt someone else. It could be along the lines of that. Or it could be, Mum, every time I walk down that street, there's something weird's going on at that house. There's people coming and going every day. It could be an address where drugs are being sold from. Where are we going to put this information? So fearless.org is the place for that. It's 100% anonymous. It cannot trace where the information has been sent from, not the device, not the IP address, not the VPN. It gets scrambled 100 times over. On top of that, the information that you would provide, so it could be Alex Smith carries a knife. They will corroborate that to see if anyone else knows that information before acting upon it. Secondly, they will sanitize and separate material or information if it's obvious where the information's come from. So it could be information like Alex Smith lives next door to me. We sit next to each other in science. They are being groomed by a gang. I see them selling drugs for the gang every Thursday night down this street when I'm out walking my sausage dogs. Right, okay, it's obvious where that information's come from. So what would happen to that information is it would be separated and sanitized. So broken down into different reports. Alex Smith lives here. Alex Smith is being exploited. Alex Smith is selling drugs for gangs. Alex Smith frequents this road at this time. So that would also be corroborated with other evidence to sort of, again, detach the information from the source. But this is a really powerful way to let your child know and ourselves know that we can keep our community safer. We can actually do something about it because it can feel really frustrating if you live somewhere and you're like, I know there's stuff going on in that house, but I don't want to give a statement to police. I don't want to be dragged into it. I'm going to end up getting retaliation against me and my children, my house. So what can we do about it? We can report it to Fearless. And imagine how empowering that is to give that to a child. You don't have to remain silent about this, but it does not have to come back to you. Helping children feel empowered about making their own areas safer is a way that we can reduce fear. And remember that fear is one of the drivers for violence amongst young people. Okay, we're nearly at the end of our session. I'm going to play a piece of spoken word. Now, this is a poem that has been written by a good friend and colleague of mine, Quinton Green, aka Mr. Malise. He is a professional youth mentor. He's a knife crime activist. He's also a UK garage MC, if anyone likes a bit of old school garage. He has performed on stage with people like Stormzy, Maya Jama, Wiley. Oh my goodness, he runs workshops with young people about music, poetry, and arts. Young people love him. I've run loads of workshops with Quinton before. I might as well just give up because I'm just someone's old mum and he's just great. This is his piece, Knife Sentence. Quinton himself was stabbed when he was 19. You know, is now into his late 40s. He'd probably hate me for telling you that. But he survived, and this is his piece, Knife Sentence. Okay. I will send you the link to that. I'll also send you the link to Quinton's Spotify. He does loads of other pieces of work as well. Um, it's called Knife Sentence if you want to watch it in the meantime, if you go to YouTube. Some of our other resources are here at benkinsella.org.uk. We've got our podcast series that I'll also send you the link to. I know that Hannah's already sent you the link to the Helping Our Children Stay Safe guide, which is this little guide. It's got so many things that we've already spoken about, but just a little reminder, a little prompt if we're thinking about having conversations with our children about knife crime. Some further help and resources, please just do explore these websites at your leisure. Please have a look at the Humber VPP website, which I'll show you in a minute. Smartphone free childhood. Let's reduce screen time for our children. The Iverson Trust is an amazing organisation that does work all across the UK with families whose children are at risk of exploitation or who are being exploited. So do have a look at those websites as well. This is the Humber VPP website, which you may already be familiar with. Do have a look and explore that. And thank you so much for your time today. I'm just going to have a look in the Q&A box to see if there's any questions that have come out of today. Let's have a look. When I see the news about a young person stabbing another 11 times within a few minutes, I get baffled as to how they're able to do this. How do I know where to stab someone and that person won't survive? Are they watching it online or see someone do that before? Can you answer that based on your research? What I would say is actually it's very easy to kill someone, and that's why they're used. Lots of young people don't realize the serious damage that can happen with a knife. You don't have to be technically trained in combat or ability to use it. And actually not realizing the serious damage that it can do.